The legend of Blackbeard the sea has always kept its secrets well. But among sailors, there is one name whispered with more dread than storms, rocks, or even the depths themselves: Blackbeard. Edward Teach, as he was once known, carved his legacy not just in blood and gold, but in fear, a fear that stretched from the Caribbean to the mist-choked waters of the Carolinas. His enemies feared his cutlass, but his own crew swore they feared the man himself far more than any naval cannon. For there was something about Blackbeard, something not entirely mortal, that made his legend burn darker than the rest. It begins in the year 1717, when he seized a captured French vessel and renamed her the Queen Anne's Revenge. She was more than a ship to him. She was his fortress, his stage, and his coffin waiting to close. Blackbeard understood the theater of fear, and he wielded it like a weapon sharper than steel. He wove slow-burning fuses into his beard, lighting them so that smoke and sparks surrounded his face like a demon risen from the pit. In the chaos of battle, men swore they saw fire dancing across his eyes, as if hell itself had chosen a captain. But his hunger was not for gold alone. Blackbeard sought something else, something the sea itself seemed to promise him. Wherever his sails cut across the horizon, strange tales followed: ships found adrift with no crew aboard, villages abandoned in a single night, and survivors whispering that Blackbeard was more shadow than flesh. Some swore he could not be killed, for he had already made a pact with something darker than any crown or kingdom. By the time his legend reached the shores of the Carolinas, even his own crew began to wonder who or what they served. In the dim lantern light below deck, men swore they saw their captain speaking alone to shadows, the words in no tongue they recognized. And more than once, the Queen Anne's Revenge changed course without warning, as though the tide itself bent to Blackbeard's will. But the true horror of Blackbeard's legend did not lie in his battles or plunder. It was what he carried with him after the fight. Survivors of his raids often spoke of the silence that followed, the unnatural calm where even gulls refused to circle overhead, and the water itself seemed to recoil. Those who lived long enough to tell the tale claimed that Blackbeard left behind more than bodies. He left curses, anchors of terror that lingered long after his ship's black sails disappeared beyond the horizon. And yet, even for a man like him, the end was destined to come. His fate was sealed off the coast of Ocracoke, in a clash that would etch itself into history and superstition alike. The battle with Lieutenant Maynard's forces was fierce, and it is said Blackbeard was struck with more than 20 wounds before he fell. But sailors swore the sea itself resisted his death. His head was severed from his body and strung from the bow of Maynard's ship as proof of victory. And yet, as the blood mingled with the tide, his body was seen to rise, staggering without its head, before vanishing into the waves. From that day onward, the waters of Ocracoke were never the same. Fishermen spoke of strange shapes beneath their boats. Lights shimmered on the horizon where no ships sailed. And in the dead of night, the sound of footsteps, heavy and wet, echoed across the sand as though something dragged itself from the surf to search for what was lost. For the legend did not end with Blackbeard's death. It began there. What men called victory was only the opening chapter of a curse that still clings to the coast like mist. And those who dare to sail those waters after dark swear that sometimes, in the distance, they see a figure pacing the shore, smoke curling where a face should be, waiting, always waiting, for the return of his head. And so begins the true tale of Blackbeard. Not of the man, but of the shadow he left behind. The waters off Ocracoke Island are beautiful in the daylight, tranquil, blue, and deceptively shallow, but when night falls, the place changes. Locals whisper that the sea remembers, that it holds onto the last screams of the men who fell with Blackbeard. On calm nights when the tide drifts quietly over the shoals, people say you can hear it. The faint clash of steel, the boom of cannons muffled beneath the waves, and the heavy drag of something moving just below the surface. For decades after his death, fishermen avoided the inlet after dusk. Not because of storms or treacherous waters, but because of what they claimed to see. A massive shadow, larger than any man, rose from the foam. It drifted alongside their boats, headless, dripping with seawater, and cloaked in smoke that smelled faintly of burnt pitch. Some swore it was Blackbeard's restless body, still searching, still hunting, dragging its cutlass behind it as though the sea could not weigh it down. The strangest stories came from those who dared to anchor overnight. Lanterns would flicker without wind. Nets would come up torn, not by fish or rocks, but as if cut deliberately with a blade. On several occasions, fishermen vanished without a trace, their boats found days later floating aimlessly, provisions untouched. The only clue left behind was a dark, tar-like residue smeared across the deck, a substance that hardened like resin and carried the acrid scent of gunpowder. But Ocracoke was not only a haunt for sailors. The island itself began to whisper with its own strange tales. Locals spoke of seeing a figure pacing the beaches late at night, towering, broad-shouldered, and crowned in phantom flames that hissed like dying coals. Dogs would bark and whimper, refusing to step closer to the surf. Horses bolted without reason, their hooves pounding the sand as though chased by something unseen. A century after Blackbeard's death, travelers recorded eerie encounters that lent weight to the legend. In 1813, a diary belonging to a merchant named Thomas Winslow described an unsettling night on Ocracoke. He and his crew had camped on the beach after their vessel was damaged in a storm. At midnight, a roar erupted from the ocean. Not thunder, but something guttural, like the bellow of a man's final breath drawn through water. When they looked to the shore, they saw footprints appearing in the sand, large and heavy, each step pressed deep, though no figure could be seen. The trail led straight toward their campfire before vanishing into the flames, extinguishing them instantly. By morning, Winslow's men refused to remain. They abandoned the half-repaired vessel and took to rowboats, paddling feverishly away from the island. He wrote in his final note, "It was as though the devil himself walked the shore, and though we did not see his face, the stench of smoke and death hung in the air." The legends only grew stronger with time. Sailors called the apparition the Devil's Wake, a reminder that even without a head, Blackbeard's fury lingered, bound to the waters where his body was cast down. Children on the island were warned never to wander the beaches at night, lest they hear the crunch of boots in the sand behind them, each step closing the gap until icy hands wrapped around their shoulders. But it wasn't only the locals who kept the tale alive. Tourists began to arrive in the 20th century, drawn by curiosity, daring each other to walk Ocracoke's beaches under a moonless sky. Some returned pale and shaken, unable to speak of what they had witnessed. A few never returned at all. Police reports from the 1930s tell of missing persons whose last known location was near the inlet. Search parties scoured the shoreline, but the only thing they ever found were abandoned shoes, footprints ending abruptly at the tide's edge, and the faint smell of burnt rope on the breeze. Those who still live on the island will tell you there's no mystery to it. Blackbeard never left. His head may have been displayed on Maynard's bow, but the rest of him was claimed by the sea, and the sea does not release its bargains so easily. They say he walks still, cursed to search the beaches of Ocracoke forever, hunting for the piece of himself that was stolen. And though centuries have passed, the warnings remain the same. If you hear heavy footsteps behind you on the sand, do not look back. For to see the headless shadow is to be claimed by it, dragged into the surf to join the ranks of the drowned. But this is only the beginning of the curse. For Blackbeard's wrath was not limited to the island's shore. There were nights when the sea itself seemed to ignite with his presence. Nights when ships swore they saw the burning glow of his beard rising through the mist, heralding disaster unlike anything they had faced before. And those nights, the water screamed. The sea has always been unforgiving, but off the coast of the Carolinas, there is one terror greater than storms, reefs, or starvation. Sailors dread the nights when the horizon glows faintly red, when the waves themselves reflect a fire that has no source. These are the Knights of the Burning Beard. Long after Blackbeard's death, captains began to report strange encounters. They spoke of a phantom ship that would appear out of the fog with no warning, its sails black as coal, its lanterns extinguished, yet its decks glowing with a sickly fire that did not consume wood or rope. Witnesses claimed to see a towering figure upon the quarterdeck, smoke streaming from its face, sparks hissing in the night air like embers torn from a forge. Some swore they recognized him instantly, for there was only one man who had ever carried such a visage, Blackbeard, risen from the depths. But this was no mere haunting. Wherever the burning beard appeared, misfortune followed. A merchant ship might find its cargo aflame, though no spark had touched it. A schooner might lose its bearings entirely, its compass spinning wildly until the vessel crashed upon hidden shoals. Others told of an even darker fate, that when the phantom ship drew near, a choking fog rolled in, and the crew would vanish one by one. Sometimes they were taken silently, as if plucked into the sea by unseen hands. Other times, their screams echoed across the waves, cut short by the sound of water rushing into unwilling lungs. By dawn, the ship would drift empty, the fire on the horizon gone, but the stench of pitch and brimstone lingering. One of the earliest surviving records of the Burning Beard comes from 1762, in the journal of a whaler named Abram Cole. His entry describes a night of glassy seas, when the crew spotted what they thought was another vessel cutting across the moonlight. But as it drew closer, Abram swore the ship glided without wind, its sails limp, its hull glowing as if alive with embers. He wrote, "Upon the deck stood a giant of a man, wreathed in smoke and fire, yet no flame consumed him. He raised his hand and pointed, and at once, the sea beneath us boiled as though hell had risen from below. Hours later, their ship ran aground in waters they had sailed for decades without incident. Abram survived, but most of his crew did not. He never returned to sea. The curse did not confine itself to the 18th century. Reports persisted well into the modern age. In 1902, the schooner Clarabelle disappeared off the Outer Banks with all 12 hands aboard. Locals said the last sighting of the ship placed it beneath a strange red glow, a burning fog that trailed it for hours before it vanished entirely. In 1955, a Coast Guard patrol reported distress flares near Ocracoke, but when they reached the coordinates, they found nothing, only a haze of smoke and an unnatural silence that silenced even the surf. And there is the most chilling report of all. October 1998, when a small fishing trawler named Haven's Luck radioed for help just after midnight. The crew claimed they were being followed by a ship without lights, a massive silhouette barely visible through a strange haze. Their final transmission was drowned in static, but one word crackled clearly through: Beard. When rescuers found the vessel days later, it was drifting intact, nets still coiled, meals half-eaten on the table. But not a single soul remained. The only clue was a scorch mark on the mainmast, black and oily, shaped eerily like the twisting curls of a beard. The burning beard was no longer a sailor's superstition. It had become a generational curse, a mark that Blackbeard's wrath had not been buried with his body, nor quenched by salt water. It was as though he had become something more than man, more than ghost, something bound to the sea itself, a punishment for all who dared to claim its bounty. And yet, some whispered of a reason behind the haunting. They believed that Blackbeard had indeed struck a bargain in life, a pact sealed in blood and fire. In exchange for his terror and his victories, he had been granted invincibility, a shield from death itself. But when Maynard's blade took his head, the pact was broken. His body returned to the sea, but his spirit could not rest, for the bargain was unfulfilled. Now he roams the waters, searching endlessly, his burning visage a reminder that hell does not easily release its debts. To see the burning beard is to be marked. Sailors who return from such an encounter rarely live long afterward. Some go mad, raving about phantom voices in the waves. Others drown themselves in shallow water, as though compelled to join their lost captain. And still others simply vanish, slipping from docks, falling overboard, disappearing in ways no storm could explain. The sea keeps its secrets. But one thing is certain: Blackbeard's curse did not die with him. It lingers, coiling in the mist, waiting for the next ship to cross its path. And when it comes, there will be no escape, for the sea itself will burn. There are storms at sea that every sailor dreads. Those sudden tempests where lightning rips the sky open and the waves rise like walls. But the night the sea screamed was different. It was not the storm itself that terrified those who survived, but what moved within it. The tale comes from 1866, when a coastal steamer called the Greyhound departed Charleston bound for Norfolk. The skies were calm when she left port, her decks bustling with merchants and families eager to avoid the long land routes. But by nightfall, as the ship passed the waters near Ocracoke, the wind died altogether. The sea turned eerily smooth, like black glass, and an unnatural silence spread across the vessel. The crew whispered of a smell, faint at first but growing stronger, like burning pitch carried across the water. By midnight, a fog rose. It was thicker than anything the captain had ever seen, so dense that lanterns cast no more than a hand's length of light. The passengers grew restless, huddling together as the crew rang bells to keep track of their positions on deck. But then came the sound, a deep, rattling groan, as if the ocean itself had drawn breath. It started low, so low the men thought it was the creak of the hull. Then it grew. The groan turned into a bellow, a thunderous, unearthly wail that shook the ship from stem to stern. Women screamed. Children covered their ears. Men dropped tools and ropes as if their very bones trembled. The sea was screaming. What emerged from the fog froze every heart aboard. A massive silhouette loomed, black sails drooping yet somehow billowing in a wind no one else could feel. The vessel was ablaze, not with consuming fire, but with spectral flames that hissed and smoked without burning wood or rope. Figures paced the deck, blurred and flickering, their movements jerky as if half-bound to another world. And at the bow, rising tall and headless, was the unmistakable frame of Blackbeard himself. His body glistened as though soaked in brine, water streaming endlessly from his wounds, his severed neck belching smoke that twisted upward like a beacon. His cutlass dragged across the planks with a screech that cut through the wail of the sea. Then he raised it, pointing directly at the Greyhound. At once, the ocean surged. Waves rose from nowhere, slamming into the steamer, tossing passengers like ragdolls. Survivors later claimed the voices came next. Not just one, but hundreds, layered and distorted, as though every man who had ever died beneath Blackbeard's blade had risen to scream in unison. Their cries echoed inside the ears of the living, forcing men to their knees, hands clamped over their skulls. Some passengers hurled themselves into the water, unable to bear it, and were dragged under without a ripple. The captain fought to turn the vessel, but the compass spun wildly, useless in the choking fog. The wheel resisted, stiff as stone, as if unseen hands fought to hold it steady. And all the while, the headless phantom advanced across his own deck, each step booming louder than cannon fire, the glow of his burning beard casting sparks across the black mist. Then, as suddenly as it began, the apparition vanished. The fog lifted. The waters calmed. But the Greyhound was in ruin. Rigging torn, cargo smashed, decks awash with blood and seawater. Out of nearly 80 passengers, fewer than 30 survived. Their eyes carried the same hollow look, a terror so deep it seemed carved into their very souls. And when asked what they had witnessed, they all gave the same answer. The sea itself screamed, and the devil walked upon it. That was not the only night the scream was heard. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, ships reported similar phenomena. An ear-splitting cry that came from no throat, no beast, but the water itself. It came suddenly, a banshee's wail rising from the depths, always near the shoals of Ocracoke. And with it came disaster. Ships wrecked on reefs they should have seen, crews vanishing as though snatched into the waves, vessels adrift with decks scorched and silent. Modern skeptics call it folklore, a sailor's tale meant to explain the treacherous waters of the Outer Banks. But those who live on the island do not laugh. They still whisper that the scream is a warning, that when the sound rises, Blackbeard walks again, searching the seas for what was stolen. And the most chilling part of all? Some believe that each time the scream is heard, it grows louder, as if more voices join the chorus, as if every lost soul swallowed by those cursed waters has been bound to Blackbeard's eternal crew. If that is true, then the sea does not merely hide his ghost. It is his army, and it grows stronger with every ship that dares to pass. For centuries, Blackbeard's story has been told as a tale of piracy, greed, and bloodshed. Yet, beneath the folklore lies something darker, something that refuses to rest in the shallow grave history tried to give him. His body may have fallen at Ocracoke, his head displayed as a trophy, but the sea has never stopped echoing his presence. And those who have witnessed it say his curse is not bound by time. In the modern age, technology has not silenced the legend. It has only given it new evidence. Divers exploring the wreck of the Queen Anne's Revenge in 1996 returned shaken, some refusing to ever dive again. They reported that their instruments malfunctioned near the wreck site. Compasses spun uncontrollably, oxygen gauges dropped and surged without reason, and lights flickered until they failed completely. Most terrifying were the voices. At first muffled, like radio interference, but soon clear enough to recognize as guttural chants in no known language. One diver claimed he felt a hand grip his ankle and pull, though no one was near. When he was dragged to the surface by his partner, his leg bore deep indentations, as if seared into the skin by rope burned hot. Local fishermen still warn tourists away from the wreck. They say the ship is not merely an artifact of history but a prison, one that barely holds back what remains of its captain. And on certain nights, when the moonlight cuts the water just right, some swear they see a figure standing on the reef, smoke curling upward where a face should be, watching the shoreline with patient, burning hatred. But perhaps the most terrifying accounts are the ones tied to the living, for Blackbeard's legend does not always stay at sea. Visitors on Ocracoke Island have spoken of encounters that blur the line between dream and reality. Guests at seaside inns have awoken in the dead of night to the sound of boots pacing the hallway, heavy and deliberate. When they look through the crack of their door, they see nothing but a haze of smoke drifting past, leaving behind the acrid stench of burning tar. Others have reported mirrors fogging suddenly, as though someone breathed against the glass, only to find the faint outline of a skull etched into the condensation, grinning with hollow malice. In 2009, a park ranger patrolling the beach near Teach's Hole, the very cove where Blackbeard met his end, claimed to see a fire flickering offshore. Thinking it a boat in distress, he radioed for backup, but when he approached, he realized the flames floated above the water itself, suspended in the mist. Then, from the surf, he heard it, the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps dragging through wet sand. He swore he saw a towering shadow rise from the water, headless, shoulders smoking. His report was dismissed as fatigue, yet the ranger never returned to night duty again. Some folklorists suggest Blackbeard's curse has evolved, feeding on fear itself. Each retelling, each fearful glance at the water, grants the legend new strength. He is no longer a man, nor a ghost, but something far older, an entity shaped from terror, bound to the sea like a parasite. And if that is true, then every scream swallowed by the ocean, every sailor lost in the mist, every soul claimed by the waves, does not simply vanish. They join him. They swell his army. They thicken the smoke that trails behind him. There are those who believe the final chapter has not yet been written. That one day, when enough voices scream with him, When enough souls have been taken, the sea itself will rise in fury, and Blackbeard will reclaim what was stolen. His head may rest in the dark soil of Virginia, but his body waits. And the two pieces, once united, would end the silence forever. So the question lingers, heavy as the tide. What lurks beyond the grave? Is it merely a story told to frighten sailors? Or is it a warning, echoing across centuries, carried on waves that remember too well? Those who live on Ocracoke do not question. They still pour rum into the surf on stormy nights, offerings for a man they fear may yet walk again. They leave lanterns burning on their porches, not for the living, but for the shadow of the headless giant pacing the shore. And every so often, when the fog presses close and the water laps colder than it should, they whisper the same words their ancestors once did. Blackbeard is not gone. He waits. And if you stand too long at the edge of the sea, you may hear it too. The heavy drag of boots across wet sand, the hiss of fire smoldering without flame, and the faintest, lowest growl of a voice that should not exist. Calling, searching, claiming, not a man, not a ghost, something worse. And when you hear it, it will already be too late.